Sage Wonder coming at you from my van down by the river. So I almost made this a coffee talk. That's why I'm drinking coffee. But coffee talk is for conspiracies I don't believe, or theories I don't believe. And I believe this theory because I've experienced it. But I want to drink some coffee with it because my kids say that of all the stories I have, this is the one that most people would probably find hardest to believe. And what I'm talking about is time compression. Now, this is the concept that you probably haven't heard talked about a lot. I know some people talk about it. But it's the idea that certain individuals are capable of slowing time in emergency situations. I honestly believe that this is so common amongst athletes that this is why they even invented the slow motion replay. And this is why they invented slow-mo sequences in movies. Because this is a real thing. That you have the perception in certain emergencies, some people, of time slowing. I can tell you that I've used this technique to win every real fight I've ever been in. It just seems to me in that moment that the other person is moving in slow motion and I am not. And I see their fist come at me and I can just easily just move back out of the way, reach out, grab their hand, grab them by the back of the head. You know, it seems to me that they're moving in slow motion and I'm not. And if you're an athlete or a race car driver or a soldier, military man, a competitive shooter, you probably all experienced some time compression. And some people can do this almost on demand. But it usually takes an adrenaline dump. And that may be the thing responsible for the phenomenon. But I'll give you an example of time compression. And this is why, this is the story that my kids say is probably one of the more difficult ones to believe for the average Joe. But when I was a delivery driver, I was going through a phase in my life where I was absolutely reckless. I was reckless. I'm not proud of this time because I didn't just put myself at risk, I put other people at risk. But I was a delivery driver in my late teens and early 20s. So I guess I would have been I was about 18, 19 years old when I was a delivery driver. And I delivered auto parts and the truck parts, diesel truck parts. And the guy that I worked for was a little bit of a con man. He rented this great big warehouse and he made people think it was full of diesel truck parts. And he had a delivery service, servicing fleet companies and diesel truck mechanics around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And everyone thought that when they called in and ordered a part that he would just go out in the warehouse and get it. But the fact is he didn't have any capital and he was buying his parts on credit and paying them off at the end of the month. And so what would happen is someone would call in for an auto part or a diesel truck part, and I would have to go into Dallas from a suburb, pick up the part, come back to the suburbs and deliver it. So a lot of people thought they would get their parts in 30 minutes or an hour. I mean, how long does it take for them to pull apart and drive it over there? But they had no idea that I was having to go to the wholesaler, get the part and take it to them, and I was not allowed to share that. So I took a ton of heat, not just from my boss to drive faster, to go faster, but also from the people that I was delivering to get their parts to them now, because there was a trucker waiting patiently, or impatiently in some cases, to get back on the road with his truck. So I was kind of between a rock and a hard place. And as a young man, I was going through some self-destructive times. People that watch this show know I was a victim of some abuse from various sources, and that I had some issues when I was young I had to work out over time. And I feel like I've come to a place of peace finally over it. It took a long time to deal with all of it. But at that point in time, I kind of wanted to die a little bit. Like, I was not afraid to die. Like, I would go out and search out situations that were dangerous. You know, if there was some kind of dangerous fight or something, I would get as close to it as I could and get involved if I could find an excuse. And so I was kind of in this place in my life when I found myself between a rock and a hard place on this parts delivery. And I told my boss, I was like, look, I'm driving as fast as I can and still be safe and not get a ticket and not ruin your insurance. And he said, I don't give a flip about any of that. Go there as fast as you can. I don't care if you have to drive 100 miles an hour. So that's what I started doing. Driving up to and over 100 miles an hour in a little Mazda pickup with a rotary engine. Those things can scream. Their top end is really, a lot of people don't realize that those old Mazda rotary engines were pretty amazing. So I would drive this little pickup through Dallas-Fort Worth, weaving in and out of traffic like they were sitting still. And I began to, on a regular basis, experience time compression, where it seemed like everyone else was sitting still and I was driving in slow motion, even though everything was happening at, in some cases, over 100 miles an hour. One time I got a cop finally caught up to me, and he pulled up next to me, and he, did his siren, and I pulled over, but instead of pulling behind me, he pulled beside me and clocked me. And when we got about 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, he told me to roll my window down. And I rolled my window down, and he yelled at me. He said, he said, you're lucky I'm on my way somewhere. We're screaming at each other. And he goes, if I ever see you in this vehicle on this highway again, going anywhere close to those speeds, I'm going to pull over and arrest you and impound your truck, and you're going to be in big trouble. And I said, thank you, I'm so sorry, I'll stop doing it. Of course, I didn't stop doing it. And on many times, I would, basically, what's the word I'm looking for, lose the cops by taking an exit after I come around a corner and zipping under the underpass and waiting for him to go over the top of it, and then coming up behind him while he's still driving looking for me. And so I played this dangerous game until one day it all kind of came to a head. I was driving through downtown Dallas, headed for a pickup at a brake relining place in the industrial section of Dallas. And I was right downtown by the courthouse near Young Street. And I was zipping along. When I got in the city, I dialed it back a little bit, but I would still typically go 50 in 25 and 30 mile an hour zones. And so I was approaching this, and I was deep in thought. I'll share this element with you too. I was deep in thought, and at the time I was experimenting with Buddhism. I was experimenting with hippie stuff and crystals in the New Age. And I started, in that one moment, for the first time and only time in my life, I doubted the existence of God. And I was in this frame of mind where I was thinking about these really deep things while driving 50 miles an hour through downtown Dallas. And I passed through a green light, and there was a car at the intersection crossways who was stopped at their red light. And I was totally in the right other than the speeding. And I was going through this intersection when I caught in my peripheral a car doing about 50 as well. And he was speeding this way, and he went right past the stopped car. And of course there was going to be a collision. I whipped to the left as hard as I could, and I had my window rolled down and my arm hanging out the window. And I whipped to the left as hard as I could, and he clipped me in the back rear wheel. And the truck went up on its side, and that's when time compressed. So everything was happening in real time until that moment when he hit me. And the car tipped up on its side. My elbow hit the concrete, and I was like, that's hot, my elbow on the concrete took the hide off. And the window was open, and now I'm like on my side, no seatbelt. And I'm trying not to go through this hole when the concrete's sliding by and their sparks are flying, and I'm trying not to get into this, meat grinder of the concrete going past. When I flipped over, in the front seat with me was some starters and some alternators from diesel trucks, so they were big. And some of them were in boxes and some of them weren't. Like the whole front of my truck was full of stuff. And it's just turning me like a washing machine. This stuff is just rolling around in the truck as I go over. And so I start trying to climb towards up the seat to get off of this hole when the truck goes up on its nose like this and bounces. And that's when I'm getting this washing machine effect, and all of these diesel truck parts are, battering me. And it goes on its nose like this, then it slams down on the other side. So now I was trying to stay out of this hole, and I was climbing up this way. Now, because the truck's on the other side, that window's rolled up, and sparks are flying by, and my face is on the glass like this, because my feet are up in the air. And so I flip around now, and I try to go up through the hole, and the car's sliding this way, past the intersection, down halfway through the next block, on its side like this. I come out through that hole that originally I was trying to get away from because it was the open window. The driver's side window is now up. And I come out, I climb up onto the seat. And all of this, I got to tell you, this whole experience, from the time I saw this guy run the red light until the time that the end of this story happened, couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 seconds. But it seemed like I had forever. And so I climb out, I get out of the hole. I'm on top of the car now that's sliding this way through the intersection. Actually, well, that way. Anyway, I climb out on top of the car. I stand on top of the car like this, and I'm thinking in my head, ride it like a surfboard. So I'm riding this sliding car on top of it, standing on both sides of the window frame, on the driver's side window, and I'm just like balanced like this, and just as it comes to, all I can think of is get out of this death trap. Get out of this death trap. So as soon as that slowed down a little bit, and right before it stopped, I leaped off of the car, landed on the balls of my feet like this, like Superman, spun around, and there was an old man with a cane, like an 80-year-old man, one of those guys that could barely get along, and he's like, he can't believe what he's seeing. And I turned to him, and excuse my language, well, I'll buffer it. I didn't say, I said the bad word, but I turned to him and I said, "Did you see that crap?" And he goes, "I sure did." And then time returned back to normal. And, you know, it seemed like a 4 or 5 minute ordeal when in fact it couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. It all happened so fast. I guess it was 5 to 10 seconds, the whole process and the sliding and everything. So I wasn't found at fault at that because he ran the red light. And I did receive an injury that I carry to this day on my leg, where when the car went up onto its side, I got hit with the steering wheel on the inside of my thigh. And there's a spot there you can lay your fingers in, like a hole in my muscles that never grew back. But the funny thing about this story is that my boss came out to get me. I refused to go in the ambulance because I had a gig that night. And my boss came and got me. I went back to the shop. My girlfriend came and got me. And I took some of her pain pills. She had some pain pills. And I went to the show, and I drank a bunch of beer, and I got really intoxicated and numb and made it through the night. And the next morning I woke up and felt awful. And the house was empty. All my roommates were gone. And I called my parents, and they came and got me, and because I couldn't drive. I couldn't walk. And they took me in for x-rays and all that. But there was no bone injury, just some, just a flesh wound. But time compression is real. You know, Mario Andretti, the famous race car driver, he talked about time compression. He talked about how that was the advantage he had as a race car driver, that he could outdrive other people because they were going in real time and everything for him was happening in slow motion. I've heard quarterbacks and running backs and wide receivers who say that when they're executing a play, it slows down in time. So come to the comment section and tell me what you think about time compression. Has it happened to you? Do you have an experience with it? I think probably everybody might have an experience with it. And I'm kind of curious of how many of you have had this experience, how many of you think it sounds ridiculous, and how many of you are hearing this for the first time. So anyway, thanks for your time. Let's look at the comment section and see what everybody has to say about time compression.